or in Cole Harbour, and that program's no longer available for them. Now, I'm not going to get into the supplementary funding issues because maybe I will later, but not right now. But I recall at the time that I raised this issue that you had suggested that there were pilot projects currently going on in Cape Breton, in the Cape Breton Victoria School Board right now. And I was curious as to if you could give us some sense of whether or not there's an interest in expanding that, and what is your intention of expanding those programs so that there is something for those children as an alternative schooling if their behavior is such that they cannot be in the classroom.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
The honourable member has raised certainly a very real issue, and indeed we had made money available last year for pilots to deal with that type of thing. The only board that accepted the challenge was Cape Breton Victoria District School Board. The money is available again this year. I guess at least there is money available this year should the Halifax board wish to pursue that on a wider basis. And I can tell you, you know, it's just not in Halifax. I had a call from a grandmother the other day who's had a junior high student, and eventually they had the boy privately tested, and there was a learning disability, but he was owed chances in the school system. So.
The Honourable Member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
I have a couple of questions flowing from that. I'll start with how much money is available this year if the Halifax School Board was interested in accessing it. And are there any attached?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
This year there is $500,000 for the province, so Halifax would get about 1/3 of that.
The Honourable Member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you. Now, the other question is around mental health, because the story you hear from schools is that mental health is dealt with by the Department of Health up until the age of 5, but when the child enters the school system, it's the school that's responsible for those mental health issues. And I'm not an educator, but my sense is that that may not be the best place. These people aren't mental health experts. There may be some who have some training in it. How and what is your department doing to address the ability to both assess and deal with mental health issues amongst children in the school system? And by children, I mean up to grade 6 or 7.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to clarify a response that I gave. The $1 million that we had for that special needs pilots last year went into this year's base, so the amount of money this year that is available is 1.5 as opposed to 0.5. The other thing, Madam Chair, that I'd like to point out is that there were some commitments made through Learning for Life, and for example, last year we provided $2.5 million for school boards to hire additional professionals such as school psychologists and speech language pathologists and resource teachers. And we have enhanced this by a further $3 million. So it's going to be a matter of finding appropriate people to meet the needs, and that's going to have to be a system decision because they know their populations.
Member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to clarify that then. Has the Halifax Regional School Board in the last year accessed any of that money with regard to extra support for resource teachers or speech therapists or, quite frankly, psychologists or social workers? Is that part of that? If so, has the Halifax Regional School Board accessed any of that in the last fiscal year?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
I have been informed, Madam Chair, that I had to fix my necktie. Madam Chair, the money was available, and Halifax did get approximately 1/3 of it, and indeed I expect some of their additional staff came from that money.
The Honourable Member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Well, if that's the case, I can be frank, and maybe the member from Tinley Prospect may also agree with this. I haven't seen any of it in the former county. With supplementary funding it in the former cities, I got to be honest, it's not very much of it being trickling down to the former county area. And I still use these designations because in the Halifax School Board, these are still legitimate designations. I hate to use the word former county and former cities, but we're still in a system, and frankly, it is a two-tier system. And I've got principals in my area who tell me they would be desperate to have a social worker who could work either in Eastern Passage or in Cole Harbour for the whole family of schools, junior high and elementary schools, or even the high school. And I guess I'll have to take that up with the school board as to why that wasn't brought in more into the county area, and maybe they can rationalize how it was brought in. But that interests me. But thank you for that. And I guess my other point was around the mental health issue, around how we deal with the mental health aspects beyond, I understand, funding of programs for the school boards. You know, you sit 3 seats over from the Minister of Health, and these two departments are silos in many ways. How and what is your department doing to ensure that our schools are not the only ones having to deal with mental health issues, that there's some way of breaking down that barrier to ensure that mental health is some form of a team process that's able to be addressed so that the schools aren't left on their own to have to deal with mental health issues?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Madam Chair, the honourable member has raised a very good question, and one that has been a topic of discussion when I occupied the other chair and he occupied this one. And there used to be something in government called the HES Committee, Health, Education, Social Services, and certainly a member from Dartmouth South would remember that. But right now we have the Kayak Committee, and Education is chair, and that is the media that we use.
The Honourable Member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
So there are minutes of meetings at Kayak that show that this issue is raised on a regular basis and that there has been progress between the two departments in ensuring that mental health issues are being addressed?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, there are provincial Kayak meetings and regional Kayak meetings. I haven't looked at minutes for some time. I can't give you a specific answer, but that's part of the mandate of the committee.
The Honourable Member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Will the minister undertake to ensure that those minutes of those meetings would be accessible, at least with regard to what issues of mental health were raised?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Yeah, we'll see that those minutes are made available. I think they're probably fairly easy to access, I would guess.
From Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
I want to turn to a different subject, which is around school construction. Last year you came forward, well, you knew I had to raise it at some point, right? Last year you came forward with a long list of schools to be constructed. There was one area specifically that was not addressed, an area that's growing at a fairly rapid pace, and I'm not talking about Eastern Passage, I'm talking about the whole side of the Dartmouth Harbour. There are no schools announced for that area, and there are some schools. I know I talked to people about, remember from Dartmouth South's area, Prince Arthur is a school that is probably in desperate need of some work. You look at the area of Portland Estates, where it's burgeoning with young children, and it has a new elementary school. But what is your plan with regard to school construction in the greater Dartmouth area with regard to both junior high and the need possibly for a 5th high school in the Dartmouth area?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Madam Chair, the honourable member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage has raised a question which I know is very near and dear to his heart, and undoubtedly he probably hears about that in his community and his constituency, because it's one of those issues that we all have in our areas that people remind us of from time to time. The provision of the capital construction requirements does come from the school board, and when the list was last constructed, there was no facility in your area. So I understand that the board member from your area, Grace Walker, and I think you are meeting with our staff later on, and I think that's the topic of discussion, and I think that's probably a pretty good thing to do.
Honourable member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Yeah, it's May 6th downstairs, actually, I believe. Look, I'm trying to get a sense, though, of the process. And I know the Deputy Minister knows I sent him an email with regard to this because I read in the corporate plan for the coming year that school construction will continue. I wasn't clear, and I guess I'd like you to put on the record. When you talk about the continuation of school construction, is it the continuation of the announcements from last year, or are you seeing another round of consultations with school boards as to their need for new construction? Can you clarify which of those is the case?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you. The answer, I guess, really to both is yes, both. The list as currently constituted will be going ahead, and in addition, the School Capital Construction Committee will reconvene in January, and a second list at that time will be generated. And the other thing, I guess, in terms of these lists, and people say whether they're cast in stone or not, we have had occasions where school boards wanted to change their priorities because of shifting populations. And if boards, for example, the construction of the high school out there, and or the announced construction, that came from the board, and we were able to do that. So, you know, if board and they can work that all out, it's not something that we're overly concerned about.
From Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
So in January of 2005, the school construction process will be reinitiated. And when do you see the school boards being asked and consulted? Will that be in the spring of '05, or will it be prior to that meeting in '05? When do you see the meetings taking place with school board, or the letters being written seeking further list of construction projects?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Well, I think there's a couple of answers to that question. First of all, the committee will reconvene in January of '05, and will be communicating with boards for major capital, new construction, as well as major renovations. But I do know that all of the boards do know that that committee will reconvene in January, so I would expect that they will probably be fairly well advanced by the time January comes. And the Capital Construction Committee will start to review submissions and to construct another list. I guess not a new one.
Member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recall the last time it actually took a couple of years between the first letter being written to the school board, your department sending back a letter with a proposed list, which I think around what that was, and then the school board sending back its revision of that if they wanted to, and then you're finally making the announcements. It was more like 18 months to 2-year process. So is that the same timeline you see occurring in this case, and that same sort of process of a draft list, a letter requesting proposals, a draft list, a response from your department, and then a finalized list from the school board?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
I expect that process which you've just described will probably, we don't have any plans to significantly deviate from it. So you remember there were 33 new schools, I think, came out of that last list, so there's a fair bit of work, and the process actually seemed to work pretty well. I mean, obviously some people were disappointed, but the process itself was good.
Honourable member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I understand the process would be the same. The other part of my question was, do you still see it taking from January '05, 18 months to 24 months before another round of announcements?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, if the province's fortunes do improve financially, and we all hope that they do, but we've got a significant amount of money committed right up through '07, and you know, if I, as Minister of Education, or whoever happens to be occupying this, can squeeze more money out of their colleagues, then clearly there are some construction projects that I'd like to see go and like to see speeded up.
The Honourable member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Okay, so for the record, though, your presumption is '07 before you see another round of construction, unless somehow a big pot of money drops into the Department of Education. Is that correct?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
would think the school construction list, if we're talking January '05, what an 18 months process, this takes us to the middle of '06, and it would be in that next year, yes.
The honourable member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you. So we're looking at '07 before, '06 maybe announcements, but it'll be in the '07 fiscal year that we would see that form of construction. So we have a 3-year process at this point, given that January will be when you'll be starting it. I'll just put some, I've got a couple of minutes. I think 1:16 is my time up. I have 2 minutes. For the record, I will say that I'll make my pitch, so you've heard it before, and I'll make it again next week to your deputy. But Eastern Passage is a community with over 12,000 people. By '07, it will have probably 13 or 14,000 people, which makes it bigger than Truro, I may note, and will make it bigger than probably almost any other community in Nova Scotia. And as I've said in the past, if we were in any other school board outside of the Metro Halifax area, with what now is 500 students busing 45 minutes a day to Cole Harbour, 500 students. In a couple of years' time, it will be 600 students, and I have no doubt that in a couple of years after that, it will be 700 students. And I know for a fact that there's a school board in Halifax, Millwood, with only 650 children in it. And so obviously it's very difficult for our community to understand why in these circumstances it is not something that's being a priority. I understand the minister's response. Part of it's the school board. That's the politics of the board. I can work with that. But from your perspective, I want you to understand that it is a priority in my community. It's one that I think it deserves a full review. And on top of it, I think it's also a bigger issue, which is in the Dartmouth area. The amount of growth in the Dartmouth area. You have, from the studies of the school board, we have seen that the Dartmouth High School, Cole Harbour District High School are going to be over its maximum amount in the next 10 years, and as a result, we're in a situation where I suggest there's probably a need for a 5th high school in the next few years. I understand that numbers generally are going down in enrollment because of population demographics, but in the Dartmouth area, given its development, given the amount of construction going on, that those numbers are slightly different in our area. And I think as a result, it's disappointing that nothing was reflected there in last year's announcements. And I hope that in the next round, we'll have an opportunity to make sure that Dartmouth area is being addressed with the 5th high school. So thank you.
The honourable member from Preston.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I've got some questions for the Minister on funding and Halifax Regional School Board. It appears on the surface that the per student funding in the Halifax Regional School Board is reduced almost exactly the same as supplementary funding the municipality is putting in. Now, when you look at the numbers, they're almost exactly the same, and there's been a lot of discussion around that. And as everyone knows, or most people know, that I'm not a very big proponent of supplementary funding. I've fought against it at the council, raising taxes for supplementary funding, because it always seems like the province reduces the funding as soon as you put the supplementary funding in place. And there's been some misuse in past years of supplementary funding by the school boards that now has pretty well been eliminated, because finally council realized that this misuse was going on. They started asking the relevant questions, and some management changes at the regional school board have been very positive in that regard, so that's positive. I'd just like to get the minister to give me an answer on that. And I want a direct answer, because the numbers sure indicate that if the supplementary funding is 80 million, the budget for the Halifax Regional School Board is reduced by 80 million. Now, I didn't say reduce, but not bring it up to the 80 million it probably should be. So I'd just like to get the minister's view on that.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker or Madam Chair, there is no relationship between supplemental funding and the way the Halifax Regional School Board is funded. They're entirely separate. I do know that I think His Worship would like to make that connection sometimes, particularly in an election year, but they are divorced totally, and anybody who tries to tie the two together is misleading.
The member from Preston.
Thank you very much, and that was a neat shot at the mayor. And I didn't ask the question on behalf of the mayor, I can guarantee you that. Well, see, we're of same mind probably in HRM, but he's politically the same as your party, so it's that begs some question there. But, and he and I have had some of the discussions like that. So, but anyway, he has his battle to fight, and I have mine, and the minister definitely has his difficult job to do. But what about funding? How is the funding different per child? I'm going to ask this question a different way now. In the different school boards, in different areas, and the reason I've heard before is transportation. I don't buy that because the Halifax Regional School Board has a tremendous amount of transportation they've got to go through, probably more than any other school board. And as my honorable colleague had said, you know, we've got some students being bused 45 minutes. That's a standard in my area. People being bused that far and try to get to work in the morning when all the school buses are on the road, that's another issue. So it's a real issue. What is the per student funding in each of the school boards province-wide, and how do they compare? Why the difference?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Madam Chair, the funding formula is a fairly complicated thing, and at one time, to be quite frank, I could stand up here and I could tell you exactly how the Halifax Regional School Board got its funding. I could take a piece of paper and a calculator and I can multiply it out and show you. But things have changed since I was able to do that. But I do want to tell you, though, you did mention transportation, and certainly transportation is a big thing. Halifax transports, I think, about 1/3 of their students. Their transportation costs are, on the average, about half of what the other typical boards would be. There are some boards that transport up to 90% of their students. So I do appreciate you live in a rural area, the Preston area, where a lot of kids are on the bus in the morning, and you run into it. But if you come into the city of Halifax or into the city of Dartmouth, you don't see too many of the yellow school buses. You know.
The Honourable Member from Preston.
Well, we talk about funding, and I understand that the formula is very, very complex. But my argument with the thing is, each child in this province deserves a good education, and they can't get a good education if the funding isn't in the classroom to provide that education. And we all know that. There's no argument with that from anybody. And when you look at the difficulties that are happening in the Halifax Regional School Board, the ones that I have been informed of, now I'm very limited in the area I work, of course, and as other people in other areas would have similar stories, I'm sure. But when you talk about assessment on a child that has a learning disability, it takes 5 years to get done. 5 years, sometimes longer. By that time, it's too late to help the child. Definitely too late. That kind of funding shortfall cannot be tolerated. For whatever reason, the shortfall is there. Now, maybe it's not proper management of funds by the school board. That very well could be. I've always said that the school board could probably do a lot better job administratively, although I believe the schools do an excellent job with the teachers and the principals and vice principals on an individual basis. What can be done by the Department of Education to ensure that that sort of thing can take place, when you can intervene with a child early, get a plan, put the plan in place, and then review the plan to make sure the child is properly looked after and they have an opportunity to get to the maximum level they can possibly get with their education.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The issue of early intervention is an important one, and the department has recognized that. And of course, for example, as I responded, I believe it was the honourable member from Hants East, that we put $2.5 million additional into school boards last year to hire professionals like speech-language pathologists and school psychologists and resource teachers. If you have a situation, you know, if the example that you gave is a real one, then there is a problem. And quite frank, to tell the honourable member from Preston, I think that problem is not something we can solve.
The Honourable Member from Preston.
I'm sad to hear that's not one that you can solve, but I would like to inquire. Now, this is just not one example I have here, which is the sad part of this. One example, maybe somebody slipped through the cracks, but I've got several different schools, several different circumstances, all very similar. Now, is it something that the department can address in the future, or is it something that can demand that the school board addresses properly by the proper use of their funds, I mean, there's many demands on the funds. I mean, I'm talking to schools that don't have any paper left to do photocopying with. I mean, that's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But at the same time, we've got to save every child we possibly can and make sure they get a good education. Is there anything the department can do to ensure that those resources are there, that these early interventions are done? And it doesn't mean to me that they have to have staff hanging around doing these assessments in the Halifax Regional School Board if indeed they get them all done.
Order. Time allotted has expired. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yes, Madam Chair, I move this. Your committee do now rise and reports considerable progress and beg leave to sit again on a future date.
Chairman of the Committee on House and Supply reports.
Committee's met, made progress, and begs leave to sit again.
Agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Government House Leader on Monday's hours and order of business.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now rise to meet again on Monday at the hour of 2 p.m. The House will sit from 2 till 10. The order of business will be estimates, and at the end of 4 hours we'll move into public bills for second reading, and the bill that we'll be considering will be the Financial Measures Act, Mr. Speaker. Have a good weekend, folks.
Motion is the House adjourned to 2 p.m. Monday. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Countermanded nay. House is adjourned until 2 p.m. Monday.